Welcome, everybody, to the April National Urban League Health Equity Webinar series. My name is Lydia Isaac. I am the Vice President for Health Equity and Policy here at the National Urban League, and I'm really excited to have our two panelists with us here today to talk about something that I know many of us have experienced and are experiencing. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do this webinar is because there's a lot going on in the world, and we wanted to make sure that we give our community the space to think through and talk to and to understand what is happening. And so this webinar series today for April is on burnout, even though we just realized as we were talking and starting that today is Earth Day. So I think we should also acknowledge the fact that today is April 22nd, which is Earth Day, and that our Earth is also burning out, right? Physically and emotionally. Climate change is something that it's a form of, burnout is not just for us and kind of living beings. It also and the earth is living because plants are living, but it also can happen to our environment. And so it's this expansive conversation is not just about, when people think about burnout, they think about work. You can have burnout in your personal life. You can have burnout in your relationships. You can have burnout in the world. You can have burnout on politics. And so we want to talk about all of that. And we have these great practitioners here right now. I'm so excited about our two panelists. I'm going to introduce them briefly just by their names, and then I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So we have Kelley Bronner, who's with us, and she has a podcast, and she's going to talk all about her podcast. I'm really excited to hear about the podcast. And we have one of our own, Dr. Asa Briggs, who is a member of the Urban League of the Upstate in Greenville, South Carolina, and works with our Dr. Gail there, working on health equity initiatives. So we're really excited to have one of our own with us to have this conversation. So Kelley, I'm going to let you start by tell people all about yourself and all the fabulous things that you do, and then Asa or Dr. Briggs, you can go next.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here. I'm very excited. As Lydia already said, my name is Kelley Bonner. And so I am a licensed therapist. I'll do my little hyphens, well, all the little commas, and then dig a little deeper. So I'm a licensed therapist. I'm a risk mitigation strategist, and I'm a podcaster. And so really what that means is on the mental health front, I'm a clinical social worker with a background in trauma and anxiety. That was kind of my thing. And I loved burnout. It was like a natural progression. Also, because as I like to tell people, I have my own spectacular burnout doing a career. I started in one place and thought I was going to spend the rest of my career doing that. And 3 years later, I was on the floor, incoherent, quitting, completely just done, and had to pivot careers. And while I have a fulfilling one now, that stuck with me. And learning the language of what happened to me, calling it burnout, made it was a passion of mine. It made me want to be able to talk about it, treat it, and cultivate people's lives in a way that they could be burnout proof. And so I do that organizationally through risk strategy and specializing in misconduct, but I also do it through a podcast called Black Girl Burnout, where I encourage particularly Black women in this case to opt out of struggle and opt out of burnout. And I give tools both at an individual and community level on how to heal and repair the wounds that burnout can leave us with as individuals and the many roles we have as Black women and as the community as a whole. So that's a little bit about me.
Dr. Briggs.
All right, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. As you said, I am one of your own. I work with the Urban League of the Upstate and have the pleasure of leading our McLaren Institute and Center for Health and Quality of Life. And so just really looking at inequities, and a lot of times inequities show up in our community in sundry ways, but primarily through lack of access, all of the things that we talked about in our meeting down in New Orleans. But I'm excited about this work because I am one of the clinicians that gives people opportunities who look like us to come into a practice environment that is specifically contextualized to meet the unique needs of people in our community. And so burnout can look a lot like depression. And so, people, the chronic fatigue, the insomnia, the lack of motivation, et cetera. And so a lot of my patients come in thinking that they have depression, but sometimes we can actually say it's not a clinical diagnosis, but rather it's something related to your work environment or something that is going on work related. And so dealing with those things and helping those folks and my patients to navigate that, I think, is the thing that I bring to this conversation. So I'm excited about it. And thank you guys so much for having me.
Fantastic. So I think this is the leads into the first and the best question, which is how do we define burnout? Dr. Briggs, you just started talking about how, you have patients come in who think they're depressed, which is great that well, not great that it's burnout and not depression, but that it may not be what they think it is. So when we say burnout, what do we mean? And so I'm going to go with you, Kelley. Can you define what burnout is to us, and what it means?
Yeah, I like to make it as simple as possible and say it is an equation and then I'll build on it, right? I was not great at math, y'all, but this is one we can all get behind, which is it's just an equation of too many demands, not enough resources, right? And that can apply to anywhere, the workplace, relationships, activism, right? All the things that we do. But specifically, when we're looking at like a clinical definition of that, right? What does that actually look like? It looks like deep exhaustion. It looks like emotional detachment, reduced performance. Those are the kind of three markers, and which is why sometimes, like Dr. Asa just said, Dr. Briggs just said, it can look like depression. And I tell people, like in behaviors, it can look like, I tell people like exhaustion, we know what that looks like, being perpetually tired all the time. We talk about emotional detachment or cynicism, like being, I say it's the side eye stage, where you're just looking sideways at your coworkers, sideways at your partners, sideways at your career choice. Like you've just really had it. You don't have the passion or excitement that you had. And then the sad part, which leads many people to really strong feelings of shame and guilt, is that despite your best efforts, you just are not performing. You're not able to show up as the best parent, partner, insert job title that you like. So it's that equation, that too many demands, not enough resources, with the manifestation of detachment, side-eyeing people, exhaustion, and decreased performance.
I love that. Thank you so much. So Dr. Asa, I like that Kelley called you Dr. Asa, so I'm going to call you Dr. Asa. Dr. Asa, when they come to your office and you're
Yeah.
like, this is not depression, this is burnout. One, what is people's reaction? And then how do you help them to be like, okay, I can't give you a pill because it's not depression, and not we know depression is not just about pills, but like, like, are people surprised? Like, what do they say? What do they think?
Yeah.
How do you help them through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think helps me to determine depression versus burnout is oftentimes burnout is associated with work-related things. Depression is sort of like the ability to overlay those things over your entire life, right? And so it's not just work-related things such as burnout, having too many assignments, etc. And so once I sort of point that out to the patients, they're like, oh my God, like I didn't realize that it was just related to my job. And I would say that the treatment plan is a lot different because you're right, it's not a magic pill. We don't give medications for burnout necessarily unless it's exacerbated by a comorbid anxiety issue that you have going on, et cetera. But I typically try to create boundaries for the patient, right? And so we work in the spaces now where we have a dearth of resources, funding issues, et cetera. And so a lot of us are feeling the pressure of this environment that we're in right now. And so I think we, have to engender a culture of valuing mental health and wellness, looking at flexible schedules, looking at ways in which we can give people mental health days, et cetera. And so those are the things that I'm encouraging the patients to do once we've teased out that it's not a clinical diagnosis of depression, but rather it's something that you can do in terms of your work and the related stress thereof.
So the other question I want to ask is, before they get to you, is there a way for us to look at signs that we're leading to burnout? Because we don't go from not burnout to burnout, right? As you said, it's a gradual building, and it's this equation. I love, Kelley, the equation you use with like not enough resources, too many demands. How do we help folks to see when those demands are kind of stacking up to a point where they could lead them to burnout before they get to burnout?
Sure. I use that metaphor of reading your gauges, right? So like you drive in your car and you have an indicator light that comes on, like you're close to E. Well, we say we know our car, so we're going to push until we feel like we absolutely must go to the gas station, right? And so a lot of times what we can do to stave off burnout is reading your gauges. How, feelings are not necessarily things that should give you direction. They should be used as indicators. And so in the same instance where you have an indicator light that comes on in your car, it's time to go into the fueling station. And so I think incrementally as we do work, we should be reading our gauges and not pushing ourselves past our capacity. Because like you said, like Kelley said earlier, it's too many demands and not enough resources. And so if you're pushing yourself consistently beyond your capacity to handle the things that you're doing, then that should be an indicator to you that at some point you're going to have to refuel, right? And I love what Audre Lorde said. She says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare, right? And so we think about rest as the resistance. It's not that we're trying to be lazy. It's not that we're trying to do our jobs, but rest is actually essential part of the work that we do. And so reading your gauges, your body tells you long before you get to the place of burnout that you're burning out. But because of the demands of what we have going on, and we just feel like if we're not getting after it, then we're going to be classified as lazy. Therefore, we push ourselves beyond our ability to cope with the stressors that are work related. And then that's when other mental health issues can actually ensue. And so I'll pass it to Kelley, but that's how I think, reading your gauges.
Yeah, to build off of that, I agree 100% with everything that was just said. And I'm just going to add some more concrete symptoms for folks, right? So it's like when you talk about reading your gauges, how's your sleep gauge? So let's start there. If we said it's 3 different components to burnout, let's look at them, right? If it's exhaustion, how is your sleep gauge? So first of all, what's your sleep looking like? Is it terrible? Okay, that's one indicator, right? That might just be your whole life. That's a lot of people's life. Like it's been terrible since 2020. It's been terrible since I was born. But if it's more terrible than usual, that's a sign. Then when we look at the cynicism and detachment, how are you showing up every day to your job or to your life, right? Are you excited? Are you staying true? Are the things that you loved about job X or about your life, are they still there? Or you're like, I could care less, right? Where do you feel yourself quietly quitting or pulling away or engaging in negative, toxic gossip, right? Where you're just, all you know how to do is like talk bad about where you are, right? That's another indicator. I also ask people, and that leads to like, how are your boundaries? And so gossip, for example, is a boundary violation. And I also phrase burnout as a betrayal. I talk about it as a betrayal of self and a betrayal of the workplace itself. And so when we're talking about first a betrayal of the workplace itself, are you experiencing a lot of microaggressions or a lot of tension points at the workplace, right? Have you had a terrible performance review? Like these are all like your gauges, right? This is a betrayal because ultimately work is meant to facilitate us bring our best, insert your job self. And when it doesn't live up to that, that is a betrayal that causes burnout, right? When it under resources you and then discriminates against you, that's extra burnout on top of burnout, right? And then it's a personal betrayal. And I like to ask people, where are you betraying yourself? When we investigate this with folks, it's like, I said I was going to be a compassionate parent or partner, and I find myself missing every one of my kids' games. I'm missing date night or family dinner, or I promised I would get, for me, I'm going to get together with my girls, and I'm never available. I'm always missing calls or not there for them. Those are the little micro moments that are your gauge. They build up, like you said, they build up to that like red light, that E light, looking at it. And I think those are things that we don't think about when we think about builders of burnout. But when we do that excavation, we start digging, it's like you start seeing that, oh yeah, I'm not the partner I want to be. I'm not the worker I want to be. I'm compassionate, but I'm out here wishing evil on everybody around me, right? Those are the gauges that let you know, as Dr. Asa said, we're keeping to that. Dr. Asa said that you are burning out.
And like you said, the sleep gauge, that really is sort of like the harbinger of impending doom, right? So if you're not sleeping, that is really sort of the gateway to other mental health challenges. And so depression has that same sort of lack of sleep, lack of motivation, lack of agency. All of those things, like you said, really impact job performance. And you talk about those social contracts that you have for yourself, like showing up for your partner, showing up in your workspace environment. And if you don't do those things, those are betrayals, and then they directly impact your work. And if you're already talking about having a difficulty with like diminished achievement, all of those things don't make those things better. They actually exacerbate those things and make them worse. And now it becomes a cancer inside of the organization because you haven't done the necessary work of resting as a part of that resistance. So just to add to that.
No, I love that. So let's talk, because we can all talk about, I like I said, I still love this analogy of lack of resources, high demands, but not, and then we can talk about the workplace for a minute, and then I want us to move to community. So we're talking about resources at a workplace, right? That there's not as much, there's high demands at a workplace. What I love that you use, Kelley, is this word of boundaries. How do I set boundaries and not get fired?
Yes, that is the goal. We do not want you getting fired to assert boundaries. And I think it starts with yourself. This is one of the things I love with the work. I have two sides in my life. I have the podcast and then I have organizational work. This is one of the things I'm most excited about when I work with workplaces is teaching them that boundaries are not always no. And they're about pushing for innovation. So, and setting preferences. So on an organizational level, it's getting innovative. And I think Dr. Asa talked about this a little bit about being, or you might have, Lydia, about being flexible in the workplace. Like, what does that look like in concrete ways? I like people having ease in and ease out time. Monday, a couple hours in the morning where it's flex. You're not going to bug people. You're not going to put a meeting on the calendar at 8 a.m. on a Monday. And conversely, on a Friday, that gives people the flexibility to do what they need to do. To get themselves ready to be their best selves. But also on an individual level, when we talk about flexibility and creating ease, it's really about you setting preferences. So I like to tell people, go into the workplace and set your preferences in a way that it will not cause tension later. So if you're not a morning person, get that out there in the open. Say that I work best at, tell your supervisor, I'm going to work best, tag me in at afternoon, I will solve any problem. But you tag me in at 8, it might be difficult, right? Go into the way of setting preferences with people of saying, it is really important to me that Wednesday I get to my kid's game, or Wednesday I get home because I just want to watch my TV show. Whatever that is, set that preference and then work around that. Look at your to-do list and triage it as to what is a non-negotiable and really be clear about what that means. We are making way too many things important, and not everything can be number one. So I tell people, look for what's going to make impact on your day. What is the goal of the week? What is the goal of the day? And then triage your list and give yourself permission to do a couple of things. Delegate what is at the bottom of the list to someone else. Swap ideas, maybe you're not good at this, but they're good at that. Swap that task with a coworker. Also give yourself permission to say not now instead of no to folks, right? Not now, not this quarter, not this week. Again, I could go on and on, but I really want to give people micro ways to create boundaries versus everyone goes straight to no, I'm not doing that. No, you're asking for too much. No, you don't pay me enough for that. And that may all be true, but that is not really where you want to start if we're talking about keeping your job, right? But these other things you can do right now. And not only does it set a boundary, but it also makes you a more innovative, more connected worker. You're going to be a top performer if you try some of these tips.
Yeah, I also think that you use the word priority, and I think about expectation. I think people rise and fall to the level of their expectations. And so once I know what is expected of me, then I can subsequently create boundaries. And I think that what happens in workplace environments is we ask people to be flexible, but ad hoc and sort of like this ebb and flow of direction giving, et cetera. There has to be some standard practices to help people to create their boundaries and subsequent expectations. And so I think that, as people who are in supervisory positions in our workplaces, I think it is incumbent upon us to set the expectation for what it is that we're trying to accomplish, sticking to that as best we possibly can, because people are establishing expectation and boundaries based on what is being asked of them. And I think the difficulty comes when those targets or the needle is moving in various directions at any given moment, that it's hard for people to sort of understand what the expectations are. Then they go above and beyond, and then it's like, oh, well, that's not the expectation anymore. And so now you have to gear yourself up again to meet a different expectation. And before long, you now have diminished returns because people are starting their engines, turning them off, et cetera, et cetera. And so using that analogy of the gauges, so it's like, I'm reading my gauge and you're asking me to do this, but then tomorrow is a totally different thing. And so I think standard protocols, procedures, and organizational structures can help with that burnout, because people know their expectations and then subsequently can show up in their ideal selves because they know what is being asked of them. So that's what I would think about from an organizational perspective.
To follow up on that, because I think that's a really good point. there is also a, you know, going in this theme of not trying to get fired. That's going to be our theme. There is also, I think, Dr. Asa makes a good point about if the organization doesn't realize that they're doing that, because that happens to a lot of us, right? You know, organizations are all still stressed. What is a way that we can influence kind of organizational culture to reduce burnout?
Absolutely. So I think, as I was mentioning, it's like rest should be baked into the culture, right? So the expectation is for us to do what we need to do. And given the resources that we have, sometimes we have to stretch ourselves because we have limited resources. But I think it's a culture that really values people, right? And so it's not like you're churning and burning. You're looking at people as resources that can be replaced. You don't have a vested interest in people staying put and their brain trust and their expertise being there all the time. You're like, okay, well, somebody else can do this, right? But if we have a culture whereby we value the people and subsequently value the work that they bring to the organization, then I think it has more staying power. Because people don't leave necessarily because of burnout. People leave because they don't feel valued in the way that they feel like they're giving to the organization. And so it becomes an issue of, do you value me? Because do you see what I'm doing to keep this all afloat? And I'm burning the candle at both ends, and then I'm not being it's not, you're not demonstrating appreciation or value for that. Then oftentimes people are going to leave because they don't feel like the work that they're doing is showing up from an organizational perspective to where people feel appreciated and valued. And so they go on to something else, because we're asking a lot of people with limited resources. And then they're showing up in ways that they're throwing themselves at the altar, and then the organization isn't doing the same. And so I'm sure that Kelley can speak to that. It's like, that boundary, like you said, it could be very tricky because you don't want to lose your job, but then you do want to say, these are the things that I'm good at. Asking me to do something that is outside of my purview or outside of my scope, it may solve a problem in the moment, but from the long game perspective, it just is a placeholder. And we need someone else or another resource to do that job, because otherwise the organization is not going to get the best of me, and I'm not going to feel the best about the work that I'm producing.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I like to train people, and I work with organizations and their employers to be like, you become the innovation hub. I train folks to be the mini optimization person, because oftentimes we are managing up. No matter, it doesn't even matter unless you're the CEO, 90% of your career is managing up regardless. So how do you manage up in a way that isn't combative or saying I can't do it or disconnected? And so the way I teach people about managing up, it looks a lot like, I'll give a tip. So for example, there's a lot of studies that show the importance of rest and play and how to practically do it, right? So it's like, I know that and so it becomes like, it's an opportunity for you to say, I'm trying something different. I am now rearranging my schedule a bit so I can optimize rest. And I have realized that I have gotten, 16 out of the 20 things done this week. And last week I could only get 11 because I tried this new tip. Now it's not, y'all are asking too much for me and I'm not doing it. It's like, here's something I tried that I think maybe we could try as a team. The second thing I encourage people to do around that same kind of thing is, when we talk about clearly expectations, Dr. Acer said, what about expectations? And I agree with that. And I think part of a manager's role and job is to set expectations. But let's be blunt, most people, including myself, I've been a director globally, have not been trained on how to properly set expectations. So we have to manage up, and we need to say, instead of being overwhelmed by your to-do list, you need to feel empowered to say, I'm excited about this task. Here, are you comfortable with me prioritizing 1, 2, and 3, and 9, 9, 10, and 11 gets pushed to next week? Because oftentimes managers set expectations. They send an email at 8 o'clock, and I've done this where I'm like, I have a great idea. Let me go send this out to the team, right? And I didn't mean that it meant you need to do it today, but because I sent it and because I have the power, everyone thought, stop what I'm doing and then go attend to this now fire that isn't a fire. And so a simple clarifying conversation is like, oh no, that's not what I meant. I meant we can get to that next week. Continue as you were. Or it gives me an opportunity to adjust those priorities. And never once am I thinking, or have I ran into a manager who thought, oh, what a bad performer, what a poor worker, that person's lazy. When we push to sharpen that language in simple ways, like get permission to put things off your to-do list, introduce new ideas as an innovation point, versus I can't do, I'm overwhelmed. Invite your managers to set your priorities. It is their job. It's just the way you frame it, to give them the opportunity to do that.
Oh my goodness, I love this. We're already getting in the chat, like, this is such a great conversation. When's it going to be posted? Like, and it is, and it will in a couple of weeks. I want to pivot us a little bit. We've been talking mostly about the workplace, right? And we know that the workplace is the most people's biggest source of burnout, let's be honest, because exactly what we just said, competing demands, not enough time, everybody got a boss, nobody wants to be somebody to be the boss of them. And I think that's not even true, because we also, I'm sure, have people in here who are entrepreneurs, and just as entrepreneurs, it can happen in the other ways. You have to, as you just said, Kelley, organize people, deal with interpersonal conflict, pay the bills. You're the ideas person. So whether you're the boss or you're a worker, everybody can get into burnout, and particularly entrepreneurs, because a lot of times they're doing this themselves. And so, I do want to talk about this idea of, just because you don't have a boss doesn't mean that you can't have burnout. Then I want to talk a little bit about personal burnout. So I do want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurs and consultants. And Kelley, you're a consultant, so you can talk a little bit about this. Like, how does it, sometimes people are just like, well, my job is not that hard. How can I be, not that it's not that hard, but like, I like it, I enjoy it, I'm working hard, but like, why am I burned out? And so can we talk about like how burnout can happen even if people are not oppressing you? You know what I mean?
Yes, you can oppress yourself. How about
Yes.
that? As I learned, as I started my own consultancy and I'm an entrepreneur, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not the boss I thought I could be, right? Because I'm boss of one, me. And I think that's part of it. And I think it leads to individual burnout, but I'm just going to briefly touch on the fact that what it is what you realize when you get into entrepreneurship is two things. One, you can burn out on a thing you love because you don't have the boundaries to protect it, right? So it doesn't matter that you get to do what you love. If you do not set the boundaries, you end up where you started, even if you take a job you hate where you have a boss, right? But the second thing is so much of who we are is related to what we do. And I mean, really, I'm on a mission to separate that, to decouple identity from work. And particularly for Black folks and folks of marginalized identities and Black women, I say specifically, so much of what we've been taught is ambition is really just conditioning. And I mean, I don't know how deep we're going to go today, but we could go back to slavery, where our worth is tied to our work, what we produced, right? Literally, your physical value in slavery was linked to how much you produced. And so that still lives today in our community, right? And so we've just known how to, in some ways, it was initially healthy, it was adaptive. It's like, I'm going to own this as pride. But now we need to step back and realize that ambition is sometimes conditioning. And so even in entrepreneurship, this shows up because then you want to prove yourself. You have these goals, you get in this trap of like, I need to do this, I need to make this. I'm not successful unless I can flex on, the gram and show that I got the car I wanted, or I'm making some magical number. We love 6 and 7 figures. I'm not going to go there. I mean, look, have y'all done taxes? Compute your taxes. And sometimes 5 figures is exactly where you need to be to live the life you want. And don't do the 6-figure and the 7-figure trap, right? These kinds of artificial standards that lead us into the trap of burnout, even when we're doing the things we love. And so it's like, it's about boundaries. It's about understanding ambition versus conditioning and knowing which is which. And many times we are mistaking that and pushing ourselves to work to prove ourselves as an entrepreneur, that proving myself, right? Versus freedom of movement, a freedom of dollar versus a number, freedom of time. Like, that's the opportunity. And if you're not careful as an entrepreneur, you will lose all of that, right? You will particularly lose time, because what I realized is when I didn't have a vacation plan, I was never on vacation. Like, when it was my job, I knew exactly when to be like, goodbye, y'all. I'll see you in a week or two, right? When it was for me, I was very much being like, well, I like what I'm doing, so I guess I'll show up on the Friday, even though it's my day off. And so it's really being aware of those pieces.
Could not have said it better. I think that as an entrepreneur myself, is that it's very difficult for me to put boundaries in place for myself because this is I'm throwing everything at entrepreneurship, right? And so I have a personal and professional incentive to see this work. But I think one of the things that we can talk about here too, as it relates to burnout and mental health, is that entrepreneurship is a deficit identity, the same as anything else that sort of puts the onus and responsibility on you to prove yourself to other people. And so I had to divorce myself of the fact that I am my practice. No, my practice and myself are two separate entities. And in order for me to take care of the practice, I must first take care of myself. And then I also had to realize that if I didn't take care of the underlying mental health issues, because trauma teaches you to never say no to anything, right? It is the machine that just keeps you going. And it looks like achievement, but at the end of the day, it's actually poor boundaries and poor boundary setting. So you can look like the overachiever, but actually you don't know how to set boundaries and you don't know how to govern yourself in a way that looks like I'm going to take care of me because I've taken care of the things that could fuel my desire to just keep going and going. And so if that's your identity, it's hard to separate yourself from that because you've not done the work of healing the other areas of your life that are now directly informing how you show up. So, but the best thing that I ever did as a therapist was went and saw a therapist because my professional and my personal identity were based on performance-based acceptance. And in order for me to be accepted or to feel validated in myself, I had to perform in a certain way. I had to be validated externally. But now I'm like, no, the things that I needed to sustain me as a clinician and an entrepreneur were things that were on the inside, not necessarily what people thought of me, not necessarily the attaboys that all of us or attagirls that you are looking for all the time. It's like, what are those deficits that are internal that need to be fixed? Because they're actually manifesting themselves externally in very deleterious ways for both my professionalism and my mental health. And so once I realized that, I was like, okay, now I can get off the proverbial hamster wheel and I can set boundaries. I can go on vacation. I can do the things that are necessary. And I'm still learning this, right? This is not I arrived and now I can move on to something else. It is a constant reminder that my business success is not reflective of just who I am as a person, and that I'm not just an expert in mental health and wellness, but I'm also a person too that needs to actually do the things that I'm coaching other people to do. You know, that's the worst feeling in the world, is to be coaching someone else to do something that you yourself are not doing for yourself. And so learning those things, I think, as an entrepreneur has really been important for me. And I think it's the thing that's going to give me the staying power to stay present and to set the appropriate boundaries for myself.
Can I just say how much I love this conversation and what you all both made me just think about, particularly in what you're talking about. And Dr. Ace, I think you started it, was that particularly a lot of the folks on this call are Urban League affiliate staff members. We are people who go out and serve the communities, right? We help communities, we serve communities. But sometimes that service can be a burden, and not in a bad way, but just a lot, and I'm going to do, both of you are clinicians who work with patients, to think about, or used to work with patients, think about sometimes the things that you're hearing and having to help people through. And I know, and so I was so happy when you said, Dr. A said that you saw a therapist, because I always say that people who help people a lot need to get some of that off of them, because that can also lead to burnout. You're listening and taking in all these stories, some of them really horrible, and even if they're not horrible, but people are hurting, and you're trying to help people who are hurting. And so how do we help people who are helping others?
Ooh, I'm excited about this one. And I'm sure Dr. Asa is too, because this is why I got into burnout. This is why I started learning about it. It's like I burned out as a helper. I was working in the criminal justice system as a mental health professional. And I'm really, really invested in researching and learning about compassion fatigue, right? What happens when you are witnessing pain, right? And secondary traumatic stress. And that's really what it is. It is like you stand in witness of pain. If you are a therapist, if you're a community activist, whatever it is, no one comes to you necessarily on their best day. They're coming to you at their worst, or they're coming to you with a problem or a struggle, and you have to just bear witness and then act if you're an activist, or give tools, whatever that is. And that comes at a cost if we're not sure. And what I teach people about there is, again, the identity, which we've talked about a lot, of like your identity, who you are isn't what you do, and you can love the work and also love yourself. And in fact, the ordering should be reversed. You need to love yourself so you can better love the work. But also, the professional maturity will teach you, like we've all been, when you start out here, you got that cape, you're super personing around, super, and you will burn out quick. We all learn that. We all see people new in the field. We're like, okay, give that a year and you will be tired. But it's about realizing that you are not responsible for the outcome. We just show up clear about what our goals is. So for me to get through the work, what I started reminding is like, what makes me feel compassion, makes me feel best. So it might be like I was able to be compassionate. I felt like I really dove into a problem and connected with folks. It's really important to get clear on that and separate that from an outcome, because activism work, mental health work, all these things, what happens at some point is beyond your control, right? You may not be the endpoint decider on a policy or a law or whatever you're advocating for. You are absolutely not the endpoint at what your client does when they leave the room with you, right? You did some real wisdom and they went and did the exact opposite of what you just said in the session, right? And if you get tied to that, you will be in a cycle where you are perpetually forever burned out and unhappy. But if you tie to, did I show up as my best self today? Did I show up compassionate? Did I show up competent? Did I show up really engaged and connected to this issue? That is the measure of a good day. And I think we need to reinforce that with each other as well. Like, and stop saying, how many people did you see today? Or how many outputs? And more be like, how did you feel about today? Did you get the goals that you wanted for yourself inside of yourself? That's the richness that helps build community and prevent burnout.
And I too would have learned, as you mentioned, the cape, right, with the S on your chest. And I think that one of the things that helps me with burnout now is that I can't want more for an individual than they want for themselves, right? So I can give you all of the tools that I have in my toolbox, but at the end of the day, your health and well-being is predicated on the things that you do outside of this office that will help you to be the maximum person that you want to be. But if I want something more than what the individual wants for themselves, then I'm going to work harder than the person is actually working hard for themselves. And so what I have learned over the years as a seasoned professional and clinician is that we can set collaborative goals together, individual and community, right? With the work that we do. But sometimes we work in communities that don't necessarily want change, right? They can hear all of the things that we provide. We can give them all of the tools, all of the access to the resources that the Urban League has at our disposal. And those communities still don't change. But I love what you said. Don't tie yourself directly to the outcome. But what did you do to give the resources and to tool that community or that individual? And then you have to step back and say, what was the implementation of that? We came alongside you, but at the end of the day, did you do your homework? Did you do the things that were necessary outside of the clinical practice? Did you do the things that were necessary outside of the Urban League meeting to see the changes that you wanted in your community? And I think that, interrogating not just yourself internally, but then also asking the tough questions of the people that you're giving those resources to. Okay, if it's not working, then why is that not working? This is the evidence that suggests that this should be working. What are some of the things that we need to do? What do we need to change? And I think that if we're married to these formulas and things of that nature without talking about the flexibility earlier in this conversation, then if it's not working, then we can stop. But if your identity is tied to it, it's very difficult to pivot and do different things because you feel like this is an indictment on your expertise, is an indictment on your ability to help people. It's actually not. People are not just, you can't compartmentalize things, and it's not a one size fits all. And so learning all of those things for me has really helped me and freed me up to say, all right, is this person at the place where they want to receive the help? Am I working harder than they are? And what are they doing with the tools and the resources that I'm giving them? And if it's not working, then what do we need to do to tailor that to an individual approach versus, an all-encompassing approach? And I think that has really helped me with burnout. And we haven't even talked about AI. and all of that. Like maybe that's a part two of like technology and all of the things that come along
No,
with.
we gonna get to it. We gonna get to it.
Okay, got it. All right, so then I'm gonna digress and let you.
We're gonna get to it. Well, so before we get to that, so actually we're about to kind of get to it now. I love the idea that both of y'all use this analogy of the cape. So we all know, and I'm gonna pivot us a little bit. So we've talked about general burnout workplace. We talked about this idea of like individual burnout, and and we should talk a little bit about personal burnout, meaning that your interpersonal relationships, children, spouses, partners, kind of thing. But I do want to get us a little bit to this larger idea, particularly in this moment that we're in our country, of community burnout. Anybody's on Instagram talking about technology, we all hear the conversation about, particularly around Black women, about we took the cape off and we're going to use it as a blanket, right? I think that's a burnout response, to be honest. And I want to talk about, what does it mean to have community burnout? How do we as a community help each other to not be burned out? And then this response, I love that Dr. Ace said it's a trauma response. Like, how do we, I'm just going to be honest, and I'm not telling anybody to put the cape back on, but in this moment in our communities, and we're urban leagues, we do a lot of work on voting and advocacy, as as Kelley was saying, like, we do have to do some work, right? We have to fight the good fight, because there's stuff happening in our country right now that we do actually have to pay attention to. So how do we go from the place of being burnt out? Because I think many of us are, because we did do the work in November. We did the work in November. I'm just going to say that. The urban leagues did the work in November. It just, didn't come out the way, some of us may have wanted. Being nonpartisan, because we're a nonpartisan organization. But there's more work to be done. And so how do we prepare ourselves to do more work?
I think it's reframing the work. I love this. And I just had this conversation with microbiologist who's writing about this for a magazine. And we were talking about, we love those videos of people line dancing. They're like, the world's in shambles and Black people are doing the electric slide, right? And I love it, but I hear you. And so what I say, there's two types of people doing the line dancing. There are people who are doing it as a disassociative technique. Like, I have disconnected. I'm not here. I'm line dancing. So I'm ignoring my reality. The bills are here. I'm about to get evicted, but let me go line dance, right? Or let me not show up at all, right? To anything. I'm going to disengage from the civic process, whatever, right? That's one group of people, and we're not endorsing that, right? We're not saying that's necessarily the answer, because you got to pay your bills and you got to show up as a community person. But I also want to honor that there are people who are doing it because they have done their work and they're doing everything, and they know when to sit down and go line dance. They know when to get up and dance and when to. And so they know when to take the cape and make it a blanket. And the thing is like, for Black women, it's a counter response. I call it the opt out. Other people have called it that too recently. It's like they're opting out of measuring their success by an outcome, like, in this bigger case is an election, right? It's like, well, all your work was in vain because this didn't maybe go the way you wanted it to. Or that, they love someone and despite their best efforts with their cousin, their partner, their parent, their sibling, they are still struggling. They are insert the challenge, right? It's about knowing when and why you're doing it. And so part of it is like, you can have the blanket. It's like creating the time to make the cape the blanket. Like, I don't think we should put the cape back on, but understanding that now that you've rested some, here's what I know I can do from a place of joy, from a place of true connection, right? So I may not be able to do 75 hours like I did standing in line and rallying people, but you know what I can do? I can continue to have conversations with my local community, if you're religious, my church, my family members, about things that matter, and allow a contained time. So I like to teach people, because what happens is you get that group chat, it's like blowing up with 55 articles, they're all negative, and you're like, I'm opted out of that, and so your temptation is like, I'm not engaging on this. Where's my blanket? Let's cue up the electric slide, y'all. It's bad, right? And instead, what I tell folks to do is contain it. Like, give it a moment to breathe. Bad things are happening to people globally, locally, and in between. But also be like, what did y'all do today that brought you joy? What did y'all do today that brought you rest? Maybe we all collectively put on our favorite song, get on the video chat, and we sing it to each other. Whatever, create rituals of rest that allow you to show up connected, but not overperforming and burned out. And I think that's the balance. And right now we've only known burnout. So now the overcorrection might be electric sliding through the pain, and I don't know that that's bad, but I think it is about learning when to come back to that middle ground.
Absolutely. And I think that that strong Black woman trope, or the resilient community trope for the collective sort of traumas that Black people have gone through throughout generations, I think you're right. As I mentioned, the Audre Lorde quote earlier in our conversation, is rest and self-preservation is an act of political warfare, because you have to understand that rest is important in the resistance. But we all can't be, Wetham fans at learning line dances. That now is the time for us to like using the analogy of the wrestling. It's like, can you tap in now? Like, can you be in this position now? Let me rest a little bit, and then we're stronger together, which is why I think community support is also the antidote to burnout community wide. It's like, how are we supporting each other? How are we showing up for each other? Yes, resiliency is a part of our culture, but sometimes we use that as a means of just pushing ourselves in ways that our return on our investment is horrible, because it's costing us. Like, post-traumatic slavery is a real thing, right? So we're experiencing the stress and the traumas of generations that came before us. Those things only seek to compound when you do not rest and make sure that you're taking care of yourself in the process. So while you're line dancing, I'm holding up the line. And then when you are done with the line dance, you come back and let me line dance for a little bit. But now is not the time for us to collectively say, this is not our problem. It is our problem. This is our fight. We do need to show up, and we need to show up consistently. But that doesn't mean that the same person is doing that all the time. So this is where I think it's important for us as an organization, is to realize the strengths and the weaknesses that are present within the organization, and where do we send people and at what time frames. And we do this work iteratively, like we talked about in New Orleans. This is not just the do all you can now and then just go home and rest. It's like, what do we do to sustain the resistance, and what do we do to acknowledge the importance of rest as we're doing this work? And I think that that's going to be the thing that keeps us in the fight long term. It's not the same people showing up consistently, throwing themselves at the altar, but rather, hey, I recognize that you're tired. You're part of my team. What can I do to help, offload some of the things that you're doing, and vice versa. And so collectively, we're standing in resistance, and not just individuals, because otherwise you're going to crash and burn for sure.
I love that. I love that collective, as urban leagues. I want to, before I get to my last two questions, if anybody has any questions in the chat, please put them in the Q&A for our wonderful panelists. And there is a note in the chat that just says, it was something you were saying earlier, Kelley, that somebody was attesting to. So I just want to acknowledge that. And they were like, thank you for that. So I do want to go to this technology piece, because technology can be a help, but it can also add to burnout, right? Like, when all this stuff started, particularly, I'm not even somebody that's on Instagram a lot, but I do read the newspapers, and I have several subscriptions to different newspapers. And I had to come to a point where I had to tell myself, okay, you get half an hour in the morning just to see what happens. So, like, I found out the Pope died yesterday, because I actually read the newspaper. But like, after that, I read a couple of articles, and I was definitely doom scrolling. I can't lie. I was spending hours just reading articles and trying to figure out and thinking I can solve all the world's problem, and I can solve our problems here, and what they're doing with the government, and where's, what's going to happen in health, and the CDC and measles outbreak. And I had to say to myself, you get an hour, and then you have to shut down the newspapers, because there's breaking news. There's something, so some people it's the newspaper, some people it's the cable news running all the time in their background. Some people it's Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or whatever it is. You can doom scroll all the time. So can technology lead to burnout, but also how can it help with dealing with burnout?
We're both like, let's both go. Sorry, Dr. Asa. So it's a help and a hindrance, yes. So one, just foot stomping everything you said. Reduce your time doom scrolling. Really, it is what I try to tell, this particularly, I remember in 2020 when people were repeatedly watching in this case, George Floyd and the 9-minute video. And I was telling every Black person I knew, you don't need to watch that. You don't need to bear witness to that. That's actually re-traumatizing. Clinically, it is re-traumatizing. And I've told them that's not for you to watch anyways. What are you learning from that moment that you didn't already culturally, intuitively, and personally know to be true, right? And so I say use that same litmus test when you're doom scrolling. Who's this for? Are you unaware that measles can kill people and that we're about to have an outbreak? Are you unaware that, the way we might be handling certain social issues is going to erode our constitution and our lives? Then it's not for you. This is not for you to consume, right? And so give yourself permission to be like, this is not for me. I am going to go do something. And then you alternate it. Immediately when you are doom scrolling and you can get yourself to stop, pull back, do something that resets your nervous system, whether it's a deep breath, whether it's progressive muscle relaxation where you're clenching and releasing parts of your body. Do something to connect to yourself, whether it's just going and hugging somebody, right? Bring your nervous system down and then step and do something joyful immediately. This is the recipe. I'm telling you, immediately stop and then go do something joyful. I don't care if it's listen to your favorite song. I don't care if it's send a meme, get on, your favorite TikTok account that's silly and watch some of that. Reset yourself so that you break that pattern. And so that's the hindrance piece. The help piece is like ChatGPT is my best friend. I don't care what nobody says. I love that thing, but it's about optimizing your life. I use it for optimization. So task priorities, right? Like I'll say, here's my list of tasks. I want you to prioritize this for impact. ChatGPT is great at that. I want to brainstorm something around a problem I'm having. I want you to act as a therapist who specializes in women of color and help me have this conversation with my boss who had a microaggression, right? And come off respectful. I want to be respectful, but I don't want to over explain. Give it that specific of a prompt. It will revolutionize your life and minimize burnout. So that's just my little plug there. I love doing AI. I create bots. I don't know. It's my favorite side like hobby. But back to that equation, right? Stop it. Who is this for? One, who is this for? And what am I learning? Did I learn something new today? No, you did not. So that's not for me. Disengage, do something to relax your nervous system, do something joyful. That's the 3 steps I'd recommend.
100%. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to reiterate what you just said because you said it masterfully and beautifully. The George Floyd was going to be exactly where I went because a lot of times people think that PTSD is related to an incident that they've experienced sort of being on the scene. But some people had the same exact PTSD presentations in my office as if they were actually right there at the death of George Floyd. They were having flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, all of the criteria set for PTSD just by watching that video. So what your brain sees is, and it imprints and it makes a stamp. And so once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so taking those social media breaks are so important because you're ingesting that doomsday, the earth is ending, all of the things that are going to be upended. And while some of that stuff is true, you have to also sort of have a social media fast and a break away from all of that, because otherwise your brain is going to consume that and that's all it's going to think about. And you talk about heightened anxiety and worry and fear, it will definitely impact your mental health. And so, like you said, doing those deep breathing exercises, looking at parasympathetic rest and digesting, it's important because it helps with your body functions, your brain and the organs that are essential to A1C levels, diabetes, hypertension, all of those things are important when you're not breathing. So taking those deep breaths helps with tissue perfusion, helps with blood flow, helps with oxygenation to the organs that need to be oxygenated, heart, liver, kidneys, all of those things, and you're going to be healthier. But when you're just sitting there and you're not breathing and you're holding your breath because you're waiting for the next incident, it actually impacts your overall health and well-being. So what you see, limit those things. And when you need to walk away and take a break, please do that for yourself.
Okay, I lied. I have 2 more questions. One we have not talked about, which in our last 3 minutes or so, I do want to talk about parents, right? Parents have a lot of burnt out, and because something you just said, Dr. Asa, is I can't walk away from the 2-year-old. Well, I can, but I can't walk away from the 2-year-old for a long time. So how do we help parents? Because they have these humans, these living things that rely on them, right? Like you have to raise these citizens of the world. You have to raise hopefully good human beings. You have to keep them alive. Like, so how do we help parents? I know there's a lot of parents who are burnt out. They're working, they're coming home. Sometimes they're also going to school. They're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to be good partners to their spouses or their partners. But they're also trying to keep alive these little human beings who, are cute, but, take a lot of work.
I would say just creating those boundaries and schedules. Like your kids are going to look to you for consistency and schedule and all of those things. And so it's important that they learn that now, because boundary should equate safety. And when you're creating boundaries and schedules for your kids, there's times when they need to go to bed, right? So sticking to bedtime rituals and habits so that that kid will develop this idea that my parents are going to take care of me. They're going to make sure that my needs are met, because that's what a child is looking for consistently, and especially in those formative years where there's attachment in the making, trust versus mistrust. If you are consistently showing up for that child, it becomes a lot less cumbersome for that child to, cry all the time, because it's like, I cry once, my parents are coming. They're going to know that this is a distress cry versus I'm just whiny and I need a nap, right? And so being in tune with your child will help you to create those boundaries, but you have to be boundary for yourself, right? You have to take that time as a parent to say, all right, I'm going to get a sitter. If it costs me a little bit more, I need to make sure that I am taking care of myself. So going and getting my nails done, whatever those self-care practices are, those things need to continue in parenting. Community is also important, right? You're raising young children. I know a lot of my friends that lived away from home are now moving back closer to family because they need help with support for raising children. And so it takes a village, that adage that it literally takes a village. And so a lot of the parents that we encounter, and even in my practice, are single parents. And so creating systems and community where single parents are able to collectively help each other, right? And so creating those resources when things are stretched, you're not in this by yourself. So I think that boundaries and community is what's going to help parents with burnout. And asking for help. For somewhere down the line, we have equated asking for help with weakness, which we didn't get a chance to talk about a lot in this conversation. But even in the workplace, your competency is tested when you're consistently asking for help. And then people think, I'm not competent to do this job. Asking for help is not necessarily an impediment. It is actually part and parcel to growth and development, right? And so getting rid of this notion that you're incompetent because you need help, or you're weak because you need help. Asking for help is actually the thing that saved my life. And that's a different conversation. So those boundary setting, community, and asking for help is so important.
No notes, because I know you have one more question. So no notes. Everything.
Well,
everything.
yeah, my final question was, do you have a last thing to say? So I think that Dr. Asa kind of hit those last things. So that was going to be my last question, was like any final words to leave folks in the last minute.
Joy. Joy. Joyful resilience. Put joy in front of everything. Joyful parenting, joyful working, really resilience, joyful community. And remember, joy can be micro. Like I really want people to understand, joy is the length of a song. Joy is a hug. Joy is a compliment. Joy is a laugh. It is not a vacation that's super expensive. It can be, but think of it as, what's the smallest thing I can do right now that brings me joy? It will counteract burnout.
I like that mic drop. Go ahead.
Do something consistently for yourself, as she mentioned, and celebrate the small victories, right? So burnout, getting out of that cave, getting out of that bad place isn't something that happens overnight. So give yourself grace to submit to the process, and celebrating those small victories when you can. So absolutely.
I love it. Dr. Asa has to go see a patient, which is why we have to end exactly at 1 o'clock. Thank you both, Kelley.
Yes.
Dr. Asa, this was a wonderful conversation. I could talk to you all for another hour. We are so indebted to you for taking the time out of your really busy schedules to be here on Earth Day. So just thank you so much. This is the end of the webinar, and we appreciate it. Everybody have a great day. It will be posted on the National Urban League YouTube page in about 2 weeks. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day and a great week.
Have a great one. Thank you so much. Bye.
Take care, everyone.